welcome back to the second episode of the He-Man Woman Haters Club. If you listened to the first episode, you heard me mention that I wanted to talk about some clips from the What Have You podcast, which is done by Rebecca Merkel and Rachel Jankovic, who are Doug Wilson's daughters. And it's all related to that, the trad conversation that's happening right now. And they said some interesting things and some things that I think were really odd. So I wanted to play these clips and then just talk about them a little bit. So let's just dive right in. And these are from two recent episodes where they were talking about trad issues. I'm recording this in March. I think the episodes came out in February, but very, very recently. So let me play the first one here.
Was it possible to be a godly wife, honoring the Lord, obedient, and embodying that? If you were, like, say, in the 14th century, and you were the woman of the castle with the feudal people living under you, is it possible to be a godly wife there? Would you have to be making your own sourdough in that moment, or like? Could you be a godly wife whose husband is a diplomat in Vienna and you are running...
These are both seeming kind of high.
Okay, so real quick, this has nothing to do with what I'm talking about, but I've only listened to a few episodes of the What Have You podcast, and I need to say to Rachel Jankovic, you're an overtalker. Your sister tries to make some point, and you are constantly interrupting her. You need to give her a chance to make the point. Sometimes it gets very frustrating because she's in the mid-thought and you jump in with something totally irrelevant. So maybe don't do that as much.
I think, is it possible to be a godly wife while roasting a rodent on a spit for dinner?
No, but here's what I'm trying to say, is that, like, apparently the only imagination we have is rural mid-century America. If it turns out that if you were a wife in China in, 1650, if it was possible to be a godly wife then, and if it's possible to be a godly wife if you are the Duchess of something, and if it's possible to be a godly wife if you lived in a dugout in Nebraska, then what it means is it's something deeper than just the little trappings.
Uh-huh.
And the people who are seizing on sourdough are seizing on something that is, granted, that is beautiful, wonderful, and fantastic. It's also not the heart of the gospel.
So that sourdough is not the heart of the gospel, in case you were confused. This is the sort of thing I'm talking about. It's the same exact thing we see with commentators like Owen Strachan or Strawn. I don't actually know how to pronounce his name, but yeah, okay, we get it. Sourdough is not the gospel. Christian politics aren't the gospel. Driving on the right side of the street is not the gospel. So what? Like, nobody thinks that that's the case. Is there this vast majority of women out there who believe that if they make their sourdough properly, that they're going to go to heaven when they die? I highly doubt that. I think that that's not realistic. I think it's fake. Yeah, maybe there are people who put too much stock in whether they're able to make a good sourdough or not. But there's no one out there who is confusing sourdough with the gospel, of all things. There are a lot of things people confuse with the gospel, but sourdough isn't one of them. But going back to what she said, is it possible to be a medieval wife who has like an estate that she's taking care of? That, that's not an irrelevant point, but the point that I want to say, like the point I want to make is that we're not, you're not a medieval wife. You're not a woman living in China. You're not trying to roast a rodent on a stick. You live in the 20th century, 21st century in the USA. And every day you're fed fake and gay slop. You're constantly and consistently told that things that are poisonous to you are actually healthy. And the things that are actually healthy for you are the things that are going to poison you. And we're told even by people who are on the more conservative side of things, that it's actually more hospitable for you to ingest the poison, and that you need to be willing to put that in your body. Otherwise, you're the weaker brother because you don't want to consume the filth. So, yeah, okay, sourdough is not the gospel. And if you live in, the medieval times and you have to live in a certain way, you can still be a good Christian and do that, yes. But what we're talking about, and I think what is giving rise to this large, more traditional movement that's happening right now, is we live in the 21st century in the West, in the United States, and we are being told that corn syrup and seed oils are good for us, and they're not. And so it's actually a really good thing for women to want to say, you know what, I'm not feeding my family that crap. I'm going to eat and feed my family something that is good, that is a real food, that is healthy for them because I care for them. And, it's my duty as a wife to take care of my family. There's no confusion with the gospel there. That's just being a good wife in 21st century America. I really do not understand that criticism at all. Like, no one's disagreeing that life looked different in other times. And I doubt that, rodent on a stick lady was baking sourdoughs and nobody cares. So that's that clip. I really, all right, sorry about that. I had to take a quick break, but we're going to move on now to the second recording that I have here, or the second clip rather that I have here. So let's go ahead and play that now.
But it's so clear that Paul was inspired by God and not being
Isn't that the truth?
Typical human, because when he says, and I think this is really interesting, he says, older women, teach the younger women. He does not say, and here's what you're going to teach them.
Yeah, there's not a curriculum guide.
He says, older women who are good at this, teach the younger women, and he doesn't get involved in the ins and the outs. And you know what? When people start speaking in their own power, they do often go there. But it's...
So, I think what she's trying to say in this clip is that there's no specific instruction manual for how to be a housewife, what clothes you need to wear, what kind of bread you need to make, that sort of thing. But what it sounds like she's saying is that Paul gives instruction about older women teaching younger women and leaves it at that, which, if you listen to the last episode, that's not the case, because Paul specifically instructs the older women what to teach the younger women: to be homemakers, to be obedient to their husbands, to love their children and to love their husbands, things like that. So actually, he does have some things to say about how exactly you should do that. But that aside, there's a principle here that I think we're avoiding, and it is that there are specific ways in which we can be obedient. I'm thinking of, in the masculinity debates, for instance, it's, the truly masculine man is the virtuous man, or something like that, who, loves the Lord and provides for his family and is faithful in all of these things. Well, yeah, it's true. That's what a good virtuous man does, but that doesn't make him masculine. And in fact, there are ways in which his obedience to Christ means that he needs to do certain things. For instance, not be fat, in order to be obedient to Christ by being masculine. So there are ways in which women, for example, need to be obedient to Christ in their specific context. And that's, not every context is going to look the same. That's what we were just talking about with the previous clip. Yeah, if you're a Chinese woman, or roasting a rodent on a spit, or some, Jane Austen taking care of an estate character, what your femininity and godliness looks like in its expression is going to look different, but it's going to look like something. There are going to be real marks of obedience. And in the 21st century, in the United States, what that might mean is that you don't eat the seed oils, that you don't consume the slop that's being fed to you, that you avoid corn syrup, that you aren't fat, that you work out, that you know, whatever the thing is for a man or a woman, you know, it's going to look different as well in that sense, because men are men and women are women. So the way they express their obedience to Christ in their masculinity and femininity is also going to look different. But yeah, sure, there are issues of context and prudence and things like that. But the frustrating thing is that it appears to be the case that what we're being told is any kind of rule like that is a bad rule. As soon as you start introducing practical, real marks and steps of obedience to somebody and saying, hey, maybe this is the right way to do something in our context, in the specific, you know, land, time period, whatever the context is, this is the way that we can be obedient the best. And suddenly everybody's, you know, afraid to talk about that. But I think that is a real danger, because as soon as we're avoiding practical piety, and I mean piety, you know, people talk about pietism as though it's a bad thing, and yeah, maybe the ism is bad, but usually what people are calling pietism a lot of the time just means people who are trying to practice obedience. So, you know, I'm not going to drag on pietism, even if there is an actual ism out there that might be bad. But what I really want to say is that practical obedience is good, and it's going to express itself in a specific context. And there are going to be ways in which you can be more or less obedient. There are also going to be indifferent things. I get that. So I'm not saying they're not indifferent things. But when a person or even a movement of people says, I want to bake sourdough bread because I think this is caring and good for my family, and I think other people ought to do it too, and I'm going to encourage other people to do it, and we're going to look at this as a way in which we are being obedient to Christ, to denigrate that and to say that they are actually some kind of extremists who are, you know, weird and just like not a part of the movement. Because one of the problems I have, and it comes out in these episodes, it's also just a general thing that the folks from Moscow do that I don't care for, is they tend to want to gatekeep who is the real, you know, right-wing conservative traditional movement. And so anybody who goes a little bit further than they do is often just kind of laughed at and painted as an extremist, or the, you know, the weird homeschoolers who wear the denim jumpers, which they even talk about in one of these episodes. I don't care for that, and I think it's wrong. But you know, there are a lot of people who are just trying to be practically obedient, and so when Moscow tries to gatekeep, they paint those people as extremists rather than accepting that, hey, you know, maybe these things are indifferent things, or maybe even it's good that you're doing those things. I might not agree with that, but it's great that, you know, you're doing that for your family. That would be one approach. But oftentimes the approach with Moscow in general is, if it's something a little bit more right wing or traditional or conservative than they are, they paint it as some kind of weird extremism, which isn't great. It's just, that's the way it is, though. That's how they operate. There's not much that can be done about that. All right, so point being with that clip, yeah, Paul actually does give specific advice, and even in the areas where he doesn't give specific advice, okay, how do you be obedient to your husband? Which, I mean, you read the epistles, he does kind of get into this sort of thing. How do you be a homemaker? Okay, he doesn't give you a sourdough recipe, but in your specific context and with prudence and wisdom, you can determine, you know what, the entire world's telling me that I need to eat the corn syrup and the seed oils. Maybe that's not good for my family. Maybe to be obedient to what Paul says, I need to avoid certain kinds of foods, certain kinds of activities. That's totally appropriate. And to be made fun of for that is really just sad. All right, let's find the next. Oh, yeah. All right, this clip is something else.
If instead of a right relationship with God motivating you to make dinners for your people, if there's a weird subservience fetish or a my husband has never sinned fetish of some kind, then the whole thing is rotten. It's not just, it's like everything could be great until you go, wait.
I'm really curious who they're talking about here. One, I don't know anybody, even in the traditional trad conservative world, who says husbands don't sin. And in fact, the opposite problem is really the problem that is the most prevalent, which is that people believe that women can't sin. I'm not going to go into that whole discussion right now. I talked about it a little bit in the first video, but that's really, if there's a prevalent issue of a particular husband or wife not being able to sin, it's usually the other way around. So I really don't know what they're talking about. This is just a weird clip. I assume that they're talking about like people on the internet who do these videos where they're like dressed up in traditional clothes and like to make meals for their husbands or something like that. But that's not really a fetish. This is such a weird. I don't think that what they're describing here is real, for one. Two, the people who are really into that kind of stuff aren't influencing Christian women at all. Two, it's not the stuff you're watching on Instagram and TikTok. Like, I'm sorry, this is just a bizarre claim. But again, it goes to make people who are trying to live traditional, godly, conservative, like normal lives, makes them look like creeps and weirdos because you've called it a fetish. So again, not great.
Do want to say that that it's not being a trad wife. What we should be focusing on is being a virtuous wife,
an obedient and God wife.
Again, yeah, that's right. You want to be an obedient to God wife. You want to be a virtuous wife. How do you do that in your context, in your situation with your family, in the time you live in? Maybe that means that you live a more traditional life. Maybe, in fact, it requires that you live a more traditional life. And so they're trying to make enemies out of things that aren't necessarily enemies. This is the same exact play that went on with the Christian nationalism debates or the masculinity debate. Like every time somebody suggests that, hey, maybe there's a practical way I can be obedient to Christ and it involves doing this thing, somebody comes along and tries to abstract it into, well, you just need to be obedient to God. Okay, well, if being a good husband means just being obedient to God, but it doesn't require me to work every day, that's just a foolish claim. In fact, for me to be an obedient to God husband, I need to go to work and provide for my family. Similarly, to be an obedient to God virtuous wife, you need to be a homemaker. I don't know how much clearer Paul can say it. Older women teach the young women to be keepers at home or homemakers, to be obedient to their husband. If you want to be an obedient to God wife, be obedient to your husband is a great step in that direction. All right. I have one more clip I want to talk about here. Hopefully this will be a bit of a shorter episode, I think. So let's jump into that last clip.
But I was thinking about this, that Jesus, in his whole ministry, I mean, you can tell me if I'm missing something. I think the only time that I remember him specifically calling out a Roman was when he said he has more faith than the rest.
That's what I was going to say, the centurion that
because could Jesus have spent his whole entire ministry on the sins of the Romans? Of course he could. Like, the sins of the Romans were far greater in many ways than the sins of the Pharisees.
So I think the idea here is that they want to defend the idea of punching towards the trad people because that's punching right. That's like punching at the Pharisees, or not the tax collectors. The Pharisees are the scribes or the chief priests. That's them punching towards the trad movement. The problem with that is that the trad movement, according even to the people who are opposing it, like these girls and like Allie Beth Stuckey, is that the trad movement isn't a Christian movement, right? It's not the gospel, we've heard. It's not, it's just a bunch of LARPers on Instagram, we're told. So these are the exact people that Jesus would want to reach, if I am not entirely mistaken. These are people without Christ. They've recognized a problem in the world. They've rejected some form of ungodliness in the world, but they don't have Christ. And what a better movement to try to reach than people who are hungry for something greater. You don't go, it's like Jesus said, he didn't come to save the healthy. He came to save the sick. He came to heal the sick. He came to not save the righteous, not for the righteous, but to bring sinners to repentance. And here we have a whole group of people who have recognized there is something wrong, and I need to do something different with my life than what has been sold to me every day. And instead of grasping onto that and saying, here is a great opportunity for the gospel to change lives, we decided to mock them and to reject them and to treat them the same way that the scribes and Pharisees wanted to treat the sinner who wouldn't even lift his eyes up to heaven. That's the really frustrating part about this for me, is if you're right about the trad movement, that it is largely non-Christian. And I think that part is actually true. There are a lot of people who aren't Christian who are doing this trad thing. And I think that's great. They're hungry for something better. And instead we're going to treat them like weirdo LARPers. It's the same thing with the way that the dissident right-wing guys are treated on the internet. And just in general, in life, they are the scum of the earth. If they come to your church, you don't want them there. They are worthy of nothing but losing their job. Like, they should not even be able to exist in society. And these guys are desperate because they've seen there is something very wrong with the world. And they're right about that. There is something off. There's something wrong with the world, and they're trying to figure out what that problem is. And there is such an opportunity with these guys to bring them into the fold, not the fold of a weak, wimpy, stupid, false kind of religion that isn't willing to address their problems. You're never going to bring them into that fold, and you're never going to win them by mocking them over the things that they believe. But the right thing to do, the opportunity that has been presented to us with, and this is, I guess the dissident right-wing guys are the male version of the trad wives. The right thing to do here is to be like, yes, you're right. Something is very wrong with the world you have been handed. There's something off here. And we have an answer for that. And it's not just to return to, servant leadership and boss babes getting a job in their 20s and going to college and all of the stuff that your boomer parents told you was the right thing to do. What got us here isn't going to get us out of here. But there is something better. And there is the Lord Jesus Christ, who can redeem your life, can save you from your sins, can offer you a life that is better and different, and provide answers to all of the questions you're having about why the world you live in is so wrong. And that would be such a great opportunity for these people, for these trad wives, for the dissident right guys. But instead we mock them. And in reality, rather than being the scribes and Pharisees that Jesus continually spent his time attacking, we have turned these people into the prostitute and the sinner and the Gentile and the Samaritan and the tax collector, who we will not even be will not even be seen sitting with to eat a meal. That's the way we're treating the trad wives and the LARPers and the dissident right. We're treating them like they're not even human. And God forbid that anyone even acknowledges that they might be worth listening to, sitting down with, talking to, or that they might have caught on to something in their lives, some practical thing they're doing that is actually good for us and better than what the world and even some in the church are selling us. So I think we really need to rethink about who is the Pharisee and who is the tax collector before we start using examples of Jesus, only saying bad things about the scribes and the Pharisees and never, ever really attacking the Romans. What are we really saying when we say Jesus punched right? Because I think we would find that who he was really punching wasn't the unchristian trad wife. I think what we would find is he's punching at the established, hypocritical, institutional church who was not obedient to what he commanded. I think that's all I want to say about this. Hopefully the next video I do will not be about anything woman related, so people will not think I'm some obsessed incel. If my wife were up here, she could tell you that I'm not, but she's not here. She goes to another school. So thank you for listening. Hope this is helpful in some way to you. I watch too many AD videos, so I'm just going to start plagiarizing him. I hope this was helpful to you. Thank you for watching, and